Hello, my name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions.
And I'm Proven Paradox, a guy with a lot of questions.
And you're listening to Bright on Buddhism, a podcast where we discuss East Asian Buddhism, answering listener-submitted questions from listeners just like you, and introducing concepts of Buddhism that you may or may not be familiar with in a casual, conversational setting. Enjoy.
Here, if one transmits the teaching of the Buddha, what is the difference between that person and a Buddha? The Buddha himself claims that he did not conceive his teachings from nothing. He perceived them and shared them with us. Thus, if somebody else shares it, what is the difference if there even is one?
You are quite right to ask this question. There is no difference between those two figures. To propagate the Dharma is seen as one of the most Buddha-like things that a person can do.
Fascinating. It is yet another reminder that Buddhahood is a state of being anybody can aspire to and achieve. Who are some great propagators of the Buddhist teaching?
There are many. One who I heard the teaching from is named Kukai, meaning ocean of emptiness. Others call him the Grand Master who propagated the Dharma.
I wonder, what's his story? Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Bright on Buddhism. This week we will be discussing the Buddhist thinker Kukai. Who was Kukai? What were some of his views, works, and accomplishments? What is his significance to East Asian Buddhism? We hope you enjoy. So let's begin. Who was Kukai?
Kukai was a transformational thinker in Japanese Buddhism in the 9th century AD. He's also known by other epithets such as Kobo Daishi or Daishi-sama, or by his birth name, Sayaki no Mao. He is most widely known as the founder of Japanese Shingon Buddhism, and much has been written about him in the English and Japanese language scholarship. We'll give the broad strokes of his biography and then talk some more about his Buddhist thought. He was born in 774 AD in the precinct of the Sanuki province of Japan, where the temple Zentsuji now stands. Sanuki was a province on the island of Shikoku, and the area where Kukai was born corresponds to the western outskirts of the present-day city of Takamatsu. He was born to the Sayaki clan, a branch of the ancient aristocratic Otomo clan, and given the name Mao. Almost nothing is known of his childhood up to the age of 15, when he began to study the Chinese Confucian classics with his maternal uncle Ato Otari, a preeminent scholar and the designated tutor of the crown prince at the time, Prince Iyo. At 15, Ato Otari took Kukai to the capital city of Kyoto to educate him. At 18, Kukai entered the state-sponsored university called the Daigaku-ryo, which was an institution for further study of Chinese Confucian classics. Its sole purpose was to enroll and train noble aristocratic children to be government officials. Kukai stayed there for an unknown amount of time, but he left for unstated reasons. From his disciple and biographer Shinzei's perspective, he left because he became dissatisfied with Confucianism and turned to Buddhism for further answers to the questions that he had. From a historical perspective, we can see that while he was at college, the Sayaki clan became embroiled in political intrigue and chaos. He could no longer count on having Ato Otari as a patron after he left, and his family fell on financially hard times at the same time, so it seemed that completing college would not lead to much good for him. One way or the other, he left the Daigaku-ryo and began practicing Kokuzo Shingon, or the mantra of Akashagarbha. In Japanese, this mantra is Namu Akyasha Karabaya Un Adikya Maribori Sowaka. He retreated to the mountains for a time for this ascetic practice. It's claimed that he chanted the above mantra 1,000,000 times, but of course this is not verifiable. This is very impressive if it's true, though. It takes about 5 seconds to say this mantra, and then to say it 1,000,000 times would take about 83,333 minutes, or 1,388 hours, or 173 days of chanting for 8 hours a day. After this period of asceticism, Kukai is known to have authored the Sango Shiiki, or the Indications of the Goals of the Three Teachings, at age 24, in 797. This text is a dialectic allegory and a comparative ideological critique between Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. In it, teachers from each school of thought attempt to educate a ruffian named Tokaku, often thought to be Kūkai's authorial self-insertion character. In Volume 1, the teacher from Confucianism, Giebel, lectures on Confucianism. In Volume Number 2, Taoist teacher Kyobo Inji critiques Confucianism from a Taoist position. Finally, in Volume 3, the Buddhist teacher Kame Kotsuji appears to critique Taoism from a Buddhist position. The text ends with Tokaku joining Buddhism, and with the conclusion that Buddhism is the superior thought among the three. At this same time, Kukai took the precepts and became a truly ordained monk with the Makino-san temple. Between age 24 and 31, almost nothing is known about Kukai's wanderings or doings, but naturally, many biographers and hagiographers have filled this space with miscellaneous miracles and legends. Jumping to age 31, we rediscover Kukai as he selected to take part in a government-sponsored trip to China to study Tang Dynasty Buddhism. In 804, Kukai departed from Japan on a voyage led by Fujiwara no Kata no Mado. Nobody's really sure why Kukai was selected in particular to go on this trip. For context, it was very difficult and expensive to make this journey. The trip took a very long time, and there was not very much space on the ships, and it was a very dangerous journey, and so only a select few with sponsorship from the emperor could go. At this stage in his life, Kukai was just a monk at Makino-san Temple, who had practiced Kokuzo Shingon, and who had gone to but dropped out of the Daigaku-ryo. So, no one really knows how he ended up on that ship, but some speculations include that it was through his family connections, that he knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a Fujiwara, or some such like that. Kukai was on one of 4 ships crossing the East China Sea to Fujian, and his ship narrowly avoided a storm, which actually blew another ship off course and forced another ship to turn back and return to Japan. Kukai arrived in Fujian and made his way inland to the capital at Chang'an, and specifically to the Qinglong Temple. There he studied Sanskrit with Nalanda University-educated Buddhist thinker Prajna, and studied esoteric Buddhism with the monk Huiguo. Huiguo, who was born in 746, was already around 60 years old at this time, and he had become pretty ill. He knew that he was near death, and so he trained Kukai in very quick succession. In Kukai's own words, this is how his first meeting with Huiguo went. Quote, I called on the abbot in the company of 5 or 6 monks from the Shiming Temple. As soon as he saw me, he smiled with pleasure and joyfully said, I knew that you would come. I have waited for such a long time. What pleasure it gives me to look upon you today at last. My life is drawing to an end, and until you came there was no one to whom I could transmit the teachings. Go without delay to the altar of Abhisheka with incense and a flower. I returned to the temple where I had been staying and got the things which were necessary for the ceremony. It was early in the 6 months then that I entered the altar of Abhisheka for primary initiation. Unquote. The above quote suggests how fast the initial Abhisheka took place. This was the primary ordination, and then within 3 months of this encounter, Kukai received his final, topmost ordination as a Dharma master from Huiguo. Then, Huiguo died in 805. One of the last things that he did before dying was instruct Kukai to deliver the 2 mandalas, the Womb Realm Mandala and the Diamond Realm Mandala, as well as all of esoteric Buddhism's teachings, back to Japan and propagate them there. Kukai returned in 806 to find that the landscape of Japanese Buddhism had changed quite a bit. There was a new emperor who showed more favor toward Tendai Buddhism. Kukai wrote a report on his trip to China and submitted it to the emperor, asking permission to found a new kind of Buddhism with a state-sponsored ordination platform, but the report received no response for 3 more years. During this time, Kukai spent some time studying and writing. Finally, in 809, the court responded to him, and he was instructed to make a headquarters at Takao-sanji, which is now present-day Jingoji, in northwest Kyoto. In 810, after the succession of yet another new emperor, Kukai was granted the title of head administrator over Todaiji in Nara. For the next 6 years of his life, he organized and established his new school of Buddhism, Shingon. During this period, he wrote a great deal. In 817, he wrote Attaining Enlightenment in This Very Existence, The Meaning of Sound Word Reality, and The Meanings of the Word Hum, 2 of which we have read and discussed on this show. In 816, he was granted permission by the emperor to found a temple complex at Mount Koya, which has become the seat of Shingon Buddhism. It's located in present-day Wakayama Prefecture. He envisioned the site as a sacred space reflective geographically and symbolically of the two mandalas overlaid on top of each other. The central plateau space, where the head temple, Kongobuji, sits, is organized in reference to the womb realm mandala, whereas the surrounding 8 mountain peaks create a lotus flower arrangement reminiscent of the diamond realm mandala. At the center of both, at the center of the temple complex itself, sits Mahavairachana, the main Buddha of Shingon. Though construction of the main temple began in 819, the entire temple complex was not completed until 835. In the meantime, Kukai participated in many large-scale public works. He oversaw construction at Mount Koya, and he also advised high-ranking government officials and carried out initiation rites for retired emperors. In 823, Kukai was entrusted by Emperor Saga with the completion of the construction of Toji in the capital city of Heian-kyo, present-day Kyoto. So he relocated from Nara, leaving Takao-sanji in the hands of his disciples to oversee this construction. Soon after, Kukai requested official imperial recognition of his Shingon sect as an official school of Buddhism, which was granted in the same year. From then on, he busily and attentively oversaw the construction and consecration of Toji, performed rites and services for the imperial court and elites, and continued to write and preach Shingon Buddhism. In 831, he became very ill, and he decided to retire to Mount Koya to oversee its final completion. Near his final days, he entered a deep meditation, began to refuse food, and even prophesied the date of his impending death. In 835, though it was first thought that he had passed away, his disciples actually determined that he entered an eternal and deep meditation. His meditating form was interred in the Okunoin cemetery at Mount Koya, where monks continue to feed him and change his clothes to this day. In 921, he was posthumously given the honorific title of Kobo Daishi, or the Great Propagator of the Dharma.
What were some of his views, works, and accomplishments?
The main innovation of esoteric Buddhism, as we've discussed, is the idea that the real truth of the Buddha's teaching lies not in what he said and did, but in a deeper, more subtle, and less obvious repository of meaning, intent, and thought. This doesn't discount the validity of the teachings themselves. They were still given by an enlightened mind with the purpose of enlightening the sentient beings in the audience. The main difference is that esoteric Buddhist thinkers tried to manifest in themselves the state that the Buddha was in to say what he said. Importantly, this doesn't always correspond to the state that he talked about or led others toward. According to esoteric Buddhist thinkers, the state that we're referring to is a more advanced and complete state of self-realization, where language, such as that which is used to teach the Dharma, fails. The argument is that the Buddha left breadcrumbs about this in his sermons, and if somebody trains and studies enough, they can follow the trail to a highly expedited state of Buddhahood that skips a great deal of the time and exertion that's seen as valid but not necessary toward attaining Buddhahood. One of the most important things that Kukai brings to esoteric Buddhism is an awareness of the kami. We have discussed the kami tradition in Japan a few times on the show, a collective term for the tradition of worship and propitiation of local deities across Japan. This is what eventually comes to be called Shinto later in history. Per the kami tradition, the land of Japan is populated by kami. The kami are gods, deities, or spirits that interface with the community and have control over weather, harvests, plagues, and other natural forces. Otherwise, the kami themselves are weather, or the harvest, or plagues, or other natural forces themselves. Up to the 9th century, Buddhism in Japan had stood on the other side of a cosmological gap from the kami. Buddhism had all of these Hindu and Chinese deities and spirits, but the kami were in their own lane. Buddhism was seen as being what Chinese royalty practiced, so Japanese elites emulated that practice by adopting Buddhism, and the everyday people maintained their traditions of kami worship. Kukai was the first innovator to include the kami and Buddhist deities together in his writings, rituals, and doctrine. The consecration rituals for the temples that he founded and built were commonly recitations of sutras given to the kami to enlighten them and to allow them to permit him to found a temple in their space. His temples and sacred spaces also had designated worship spots for the enshrinement and worship of kami. They were presented as inferior or equal to Buddhist deities, never superior, but they were still platformed with Buddhism in a way that they had never been before. This would lay the groundwork for several historically important Japanese Buddhist doctrinal innovations later on in history, such as Honji Suijaku, the idea that the kami are actually bodhisattvas presenting themselves as kami as a skillful means. Another of his contributions is the opening of the great secret in esoteric Buddhism. In his writings and the foundation of Shingon and its practices, he clarified and made explicit the esoteric teaching as it was taught to him by Hui Guo, in a way that it had not been done before. It is through his work that we can describe the teaching of the syllable, the Dharma world text, and the attainment of Buddhahood in this very instant. These doctrines and more were kept internal to the Dharma masters in China to the point that even their senior disciples did not know them. They were not really written down or described anywhere but the Chinese translation of the sutras, which were only viewable through several levels of initiation. Kūkai's works, written for an educated audience to be sure, but not kept super secret, used large quotations and portions from these same sutras and explained them in very accessible language. This is not all to say that he eliminated the initiatory nature of esoteric Buddhism. There are still many levels of initiation in which more and more subtle doctrines and practices are taught. Rather, he just didn't shy away from speaking about the existence of the initiatory doctrines and even referencing and describing them in his works. The idea is that even if he were to quote or write down these very highly initiatory secrets or these doctrines that are at the center of Shingon or esoteric Buddhism, it still would take a highly enlightened mind to be able to make sense of it or to be able to understand it. Or otherwise, if someone is on the way to enlightenment, they'll find something that they can latch onto, and that will motivate them to continue to study and practice. Finally, his contributions as a Renaissance man of Japanese history can't be overlooked. Though many of these may be mythical or semi-legendary, they should still be mentioned here. In the midst of his travels and relationships with the court, he participated in and oversaw many public works. He's credited with having restored the Manno River Reservoir in present-day Kagawa Prefecture, the largest water reservoir in Japan even to this day. He was also obviously a key part of many temple construction and consecration processes, and he performed several crucial rituals for the court aristocracy and the imperial family. He performed the ordination rituals for several retired emperors. It was common at the time for emperors to retire and become ordained as Buddhist monks, and the result of this was that the imperial family maintained an inseparable relationship with Buddhist institutions. Furthermore, once retired, these emperors possessed even more power and influence than the sitting emperors themselves. This was partially due to their seniority, their not being in the public eye anymore, and their close familial relationships all over the court, as well as their connections to the religious institutions. Kukai is said also to have invented two of the three writing systems used in the Japanese language, hiragana and katakana, collectively known as kana. Both of these scripts are highly simplified derivations of Chinese characters known as kanji, the third writing system in Japanese. Kanji are very hard to learn because they can have multiple ways that they are written, multiple meanings, and multiple sounds that they represent. To make matters worse, they're centered on Chinese language, not Japanese. So, by simplifying the script, Kukai played a role in increasing literacy across Japan, standardizing vocabulary and grammar, and introducing an originally Japanese writing system to the Japanese language, which mattered as Japanese people sought to create their own identity separate from China. The only sacrifice is that kana only indicates sound, not meaning. Kanji are ideograms, meaning that they represent both sound and meaning. So, it can be really hard to translate a text written only in kana, because there are so many homophones in Japanese, or words that sound the same but mean different things.
What is his significance to East Asian Buddhism?
Kukai is revered in China, Korea, and Japan as a bodhisattva, and he's enshrined at most Shingon and Shingon-adjacent Buddhist temples. It's very common for temples to have a home dole, or a main hall, and a daishi dole, or a hall dedicated to the worship of Kukai. When I went on my pilgrimage, it was common practice to first visit the Hondo, chant the mantra associated with the Buddha or Bodhisattva there, and then make your way to the Daishido to chant the mantra of Kobo Daishi, which is Namu Daishi Henjo Kongo. Because of his status as a great teacher and propagator of the Dharma, as well as a bodhisattva in his own right, there are a great deal of legends and stories that circulate about him. One of the most famous stories about him is the legend of Emon Saburo. According to this story, a mendicant went to go visit the richest man in all of Shikoku, known as Emon Saburo. When the mendicant visited seeking alms, Emon Saburo refused and broke the mendicant's bowl. Then, all 8 of Emon Saburo's sons got really sick and died. After this, Emon realized that the mendicant was actually Kukai, and he set out to seek forgiveness from him. He walked around Shikoku in a similar route to the Shikoku 88 Temples pilgrimage 20 times looking for Kukai. When he couldn't find him, he did the route again in reverse. He succumbed to exhaustion because of this, and on his deathbed, Kukai appeared to give him forgiveness. As he was dying, Emon requested of Kukai that he be reborn into a wealthy family in Matsuyama, northern Shikoku, so that he might restore a neglected temple there and take it over as head monk. As he died, he grasped a stone, and shortly after his death, a baby was born grasping a stone that was inscribed with the words, Emon Saburo is reborn. When the baby became an adult, he restored the Ishiteiji Temple, or the Stone Hand Temple, which is now temple number 51 on the Shikoku pilgrimage. Speaking further to Kukai's significance in Buddhism, the Shikoku pilgrimage itself is strongly tied to the semi-legendary narrative of Kukai's life. The Shikoku pilgrimage celebrates the life of Kukai by visiting many locations that were significant in his life story. It's also said that when you walk on the pilgrimage, Kukai walks with you, and even that you will meet him on the road. There's this idea called Dogyo Ninin, which translates to same path, two people. This is reflective of a symbolic and metaphorical idea that his teachings follow you and support you through your life, even though he's not physically there with you. But it can also be taken literally. You are said to meet Kukai himself on the road if you do the entire pilgrimage, perhaps as an unnamed pilgrim who helps and supports you along the path, or as a feeling, or as an inanimate sign that guides you on your way. In addition to him, you may meet pilgrims who appear to be alive and walking with you, but they are actually the ghosts of pilgrims who died on the road long ago. This is a source of anxiety, of course, but also wonder, because in the vast majority of cases, the ghosts are harmless, helpful, or they ask for the pilgrim's help in an unthreatening way. One opportunity for merit accrual during a pilgrimage is to be visited by a spirit in need and help them somehow. For example, it's a common legend that a pilgrim will meet a spirit or ghost in the form of another unnamed pilgrim, and they'll ask for directions to the next stop on the path. The pilgrim gives those directions, but then never sees that person again, and there are no witnesses to confirm that the interaction took place, or that the person made it to the next stop. The idea in that legend is that the pilgrim helped that spirit move on to their next rebirth, or showed them to the Pure Land, with that single action of compassion in giving them directions. Another important legend is one that we've already alluded to in this episode, which is Kukai's eternal samadhi, or eternal meditation. Instead of dying in 835, he is instead thought by Shingon Buddhists to have entered into a deep meditation. He's currently thought to be continuing his meditation in a hall in the Okunoin Cemetery on Mount Koya. The Okunoin Cemetery is the largest cemetery in Japan, with over 200,000 gravestones, including grave sites of many very famous historical figures like Oda Nobunaga, Takeda Shingen, and many more. At the innermost site of the cemetery, there is a hall called the Todaro, and in that hall, Kukai is said to be meditating dutifully. This site is blocked off to all but the highest-ranking Shingon monks, and every day they deliver him a change of clothes and meals in a ritual procession. The story of how his contemporaries determined that he was in an eternal meditation was that as he became older and came near to humanly death, he began to refuse food and water, and he preached to his disciples that he was on his way out, but that he should not be thought of and treated as though he had died. Instead, he should be entombed intact, rather than cremated, as was the common Buddhist practice at the time. He was interred into the Todaro. Later, when the requisite memorial rituals were being conducted, a head monk and his young boy disciple went to open the tomb, and the head monk jumped back and exclaimed that he saw a blinding light. When the light faded, the head monk said that he saw Kukai as though he were sleeping. His body had not decayed or changed much in death, and the head monk proclaimed that Kukai had instead entered into a deep samadhi meditation. The young boy cried and said that he couldn't see anything, not even Kukai's body. To him, the tomb was empty. The head monk then determined from this that Kukai only appeared to highly advanced monks. Thus, only the highest-ranking monks should care for him. My local temple's monk was trained by a Dharma master whose duty was once to care for Kukai on Mount Koya, and while the details of these duties are kept very secret and closely protected, he divulged to my temple's monk that the meals that Kukai is fed on a daily basis have changed with the times. Maybe back in the day he was fed rice and simple vegetarian monastic foods, but nowadays they feed him all different cuisines as long as they're vegetarian. So, Kukai has eaten all sorts of international foods, and apparently, according to this Dharma master, Kukai has a special liking for spaghetti. Sometimes they'll feed it to him multiple times a week, and he always cleans his bowl.
We hope you enjoyed this week's discussion of Kukai. Join us next week where we will be discussing Saicho. Who was Saicho? What were some of his views, works, and accomplishments? What is his significance to East Asian Buddhism? We hope to see you there, and thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Hi, Nick here, and you've been listening to Bright on Buddhism. Normally at this point in the episode, we would throw to a charity that we think that is deserving of your money or your support. Because there's so much going on right now, we have decided that we're going to open it up to any charity that you think is a good cause to share your resources with. So, if you like our show and would like to support us, please instead give to a charity that you believe does good things for people in need. Thank you.
My name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions and voice of Hearer.
And I'm Docs, editor, question asker, and voice of Hermit.
And this has meant Bright on Buddhism. Thank you for listening. If you like our podcast, or if you have a question you'd like us to discuss, we'd love to hear from you. Please consider leaving a comment or review, subscribing, or joining us on social media. Email us at bright.on.buddhism@gmail.com or find us on Mastodon at brightbuddhism@mstdn.party. As always, citations and resources for this episode can be found in the show notes. Thank you.